Do you have predictions about the publishing industry? Do you have a sort of where it's going to be, what they're trying to do right now, and where it's going to be in, I don't know, what some milestone, 5 years?
I don't have any sort of drastic predictions. I think that publishers are going to stick around. I don't think publishers are going to just disappear off the face of the earth. But I do think that more and more authors, as we move to the ebook era, are going to be asking themselves, do I really need a publisher? And that's because publishers have really, the reason that everyone really has needed a publisher up until this point is print distribution. If you wanted to get into bookstores, you needed a publisher. If you wanted to reach readers, you needed a publisher. You absolutely had to have a publisher. But as that goes away, and as we get to 50% ebooks, 75% ebooks, close to 100% ebooks, 5-10 years from now, you're not going to need a publisher to reach an audience.
It's really interesting though, because so then where does filtering? Who does the filtering?
The readers do. The readers do. It's sort of like I compare it to there are a lot of restaurants out there. There are a lot of restaurants. There are a lot of movies. There's a lot of stuff out there. But we find ways of rating and filtering and word of mouth and all the rest. And it'll happen with books as well. There will be people. There'll be it's going to be, I think, a combination of critics and crowdsourcing. And there will be gatekeepers. There will be influential people who will influence the book's success. But it doesn't necessarily need to be a publisher.
Do you think it's analogous? Restaurants, so it's like who's going to be the Yelps and the Zagat's?
Yeah,
That's kind of like
Yelp,
kind of like
Yeah.
what are those kind of
That-
have
you could
those
also-
come up
you
yet?
could
Do we
also-
have those yet?
Yeah,
For the
tons of
green
those.
zone,
But
so-
you could also just look at the way the publishing industry has worked is sort of they buy a book, and then you would always hear this story, which is, around the house, everyone here is reading this and really liking it. And you could say that that's the publisher being a tastemaker, but actually you just see that as a publisher being a preliminary market, but as a pilot market, right? So you could look at Amazon Vine's program, you just see that just as another pilot market. You pay money, get your galleys in the system. They can't force anybody to review it. People who are trusted reviewers in the system can get your galleys early and review it, and they're a preliminary market. Some books go into that system and they come out with 3 reviews. Some go in that system that come out with hundreds and hundreds of reviews. And that's, a market telling you, giving you these signs. And the more publishers see what they do as, in my mind, as pilot marketing and pilot markets to see what rises to the top, rather than as we know best, and we are kingmakers, and that they're not, and they're really just a pilot market, they would understand what they're doing and find other ways to correctly do that.
So you think the publishing houses, it'll just be kind of free-floating editors that won't be housed in,
I think publishers will continue to
Or no editors.
to serve the biggest books and the biggest authors, because they provide a package of services that I think is really difficult for an author to do on their own. So if you think of it as distribution, production, editing, marketing, publicity, all of these things are really, when they're really on, and that all the pieces are working together, then publishers can't be beat when it comes to those collection of services, when it comes to making and producing and marketing a book. So I think the biggest bestsellers will still be with publishers, but for everyone else, I think it's going to be interesting to see. Maybe it's going to be a mix of self-publishing and small presses, or I don't know.
I saw recently I met an agent who decided that being an agent was sort of a job that had a end date pretty soon. So she seemed like she's refashioned herself as sort of an agent still, but for the new writer, which is, I'm going to help you package your book. I'm going to guide you through this whole process, through the whole thing, like a midwife of sorts.
For a fee,
but then
or
you
for-
even raise the baby.
Is it for an upfront fee or for a cut, or what's your?
I don't.
preference?
I think it was an upfront fee. I think it's an upfront
Okay,
fee.
so
I
like
don't
a
think it's a
package.
cut. It might be a cut. I mean, there might be many models, but I thought that was interesting and very foresightful of her. She's using the same talents, really. She's just sort of,
Yeah,
she
so you
knows
become more of
the-
a consultant than someone
Right.
who's placing it with a publisher. Yeah, I think we'll see more and more of that.
Just regarding small publishers, it's worth repeating something that both Laura and Nathan, you both said, but it needs to come out more apparent, is just because from running consortium, we had 100 small publishers. the ones who had an identity and a brand in the marketplace, who basically specialized to some extent, did so much better than the ones who were just little big publishers, little knopfs. It's interesting that we had Ethan Nisowski in here from Graywolf, because, you know, back since the 80s, I was one of the people who was, you know, distributing their books, and they were a baby Knopf kind of thing, or a baby Norton, and they do need to raise money. They've always needed to raise money, make it work, to make it work, and they do a good job, and they're doing, you know, they're doing great with Jeff Dyer right now. But that is a sort of those kinds of small publishers have a real hard time in the marketplace. It's when they really know a market and they can get you into some specialty areas, and they have a track record with booksellers. And you're mentioning Soho, which is really probably more on the fence in terms of known for doing interesting, eclectic, unusual things, but not particularly any particular type of thing. And you know, so you have to be careful when you're talking about small publishers, where they talk about someone who sort of has a name in a market of a certain type versus ones that are just generalists.
Yeah.
I think the smaller publishers who are generalists are going to have the hardest time of all, because they don't have the big books to sustain them, and yet they don't have the capability to get into those little niche markets and exploit.
Any thoughts about, like, you know, when the barriers to publishing are so low because anybody can, you know, format their book for Kindle or get it out there in some electronic format, how do you rise above the noise levels? It just seems like that could be deafening.
I think it's that first, you need a first boost, and that's where I think social media can really play a big role, is in giving you that initial sort of base of readers, whether that's 10 readers, 100, 1,000. And from there, if people like it, they'll talk about it and it'll go viral. And that's, I think everyone needs that boost. If, you know, the bigger the boost, the better your chances of it catching on. But, you know, I think I blogged about this a couple different times, but I think the idea of being just an author and just writing the book and putting it out there, if that ever existed, it definitely doesn't exist now. And I think it's important to get that boost somehow. It doesn't have to be social media, it doesn't have to be online, but somehow giving that book a boost to give it a chance. But it is really hard to rise above the noise, because there's a lot of noise out there. I mean, there's so many books coming out all the time, and so many other distractions beyond books that it's hard.
There's also so many blogs, like
Yeah,
we're talking
yeah.
about.
So like, we
Yeah.
can't read it.
I mean,
Yeah.
who could possibly, if everybody's keeping a blog,
Yeah.
and
Right,
you
like
can't
you-
be reading every blog.
You
so
make
it's
your
hard-
film and no one will watch it, so you may write your book about your film. But then no one's paying attention to your book, so you write your blog, but no one reads your blog, so you do you tweet. Because everybody tweeting, so you get, how do you get above all the other tweeters? You know, it's like...
It sort of becomes a circular
Yeah, it's
conversation with
hard.
yourself.
It's hard.
Or I mean, it could be.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of
Something to be said for just being in the New York Times, I suppose. Not that I have an outlet there, I don't.
What's that?
Are you going to be having events in a couple of weeks?
Yeah, I am. May
Plug for
May
us.
13th at Books Inc. Opera Plaza.
Yeah.
I'm going to have a reading
Cool,
launch
send us an
party.
email.
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. And we'll see. I mean, everyone asks, well, how much is social media going to help? And I'm like, I don't know. We'll see.
You'll find out.
Yeah.
Find out.
Yeah, I'll tell you in a couple weeks.